thank you all for coming out and talking today about group work and avoiding those group work nightmares. My name is Christine Harrington. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the director of CELT, our Center for the Enrichment of Learning and Teaching on campus, which is all about providing you with faculty support to be the best that you can be in your class. And I'm also a psychology professor. All right, so here's the deal. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some research on group work and what seems to work well. You are going to get to engage in some group activities today, so we will do some group exercises. And then we're going to hopefully you'll walk out with some strategies you can use to maximize learning in your classes. So that's kind of the goal of the day. So let's start off with, why is group work so important? We'll just do a kind of a quick call. What are some reasons why we want to do this in our classes?
Students who are shy get a chance to talk.
Okay, so get some of the folks that may not want to do what you just did, raise your hand in front of everyone and talk, but I might be comfortable talking to some folks close to me. What are some other reasons? Nick?
Corporate America requires team effort and project work where multiple people work together. This is a great stepping stone for that. They learn how to work with each other as a team.
Absolutely. We are preparing folks to go into the world of work, whether we're sending them off to transfer before they go or whether we're sending them off directly. And one of the key skills that employers want is teamwork. And folks who know how to work well with others, cooperate with others. So these are skill sets that employers want. And if we send them out experts in content, but not experts in some of the other what they call soft skills or transferable skills, we are really missing the boat. So group work is really powerful for that reason. What else? Yes, I'm sorry, you forgot your name. Josanne.
I find that in groups, the students help clarify the concepts for themselves. It's very helpful that they hear the material that I'm presenting through the voices of their peers.
So you get to hear it from other folks, and guess what she's hinting at there? Increased learning, right? So what we want to do is we want to make sure our students are learning the content that we're trying to teach them and also learning some process skills at the same time and maybe going outside their comfort zone a little bit and pushing themselves a bit. So I'm really, really excited about today's workshop. Now I do want to tell you that because you are here today with us, you are invited to participate. You are not required to, so if you want to just do today and that's all you're interested in, that's totally fine. But CELT is offering a learning academy. So what we want to do with this Learning Academy is actually identify a small group of faculty who want to meet together once a month to talk about how group work is working in their classes. My vision for this is if you're interested, and we'll do at the end, we'll kind of see who might be interested, and if you don't want to fully commit to it today, that's fine, we'll talk about it. But I wanted us to try to pick our first meeting date at the end of today's session if we can get a group of us who want to do this. And I thought we might even be willing to go and visit each other's classes to see, especially when group work was happening, so you could witness how other people are doing it, get feedback maybe from another peer about, oh, well, maybe you could have done this a little differently in your class, or maybe have you thought about doing that, to really do a dive-in kind of experience for the group work. So if you're just getting your feet wet today, that's totally fine. If you want to go the full-fledged and be a participant in this Learning Academy, then we will meet once a month throughout the rest of the semester. So that is the plan. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of today's session. All right, so here's some research that shows you that this is what employers want. This is exactly what Nick had talked about. Seems like he took a little peek at no, he knew it. He just knew it. So we know that this is really a very important, really important way for students to get some of the skills that employers are looking for. We also know that it increases achievement. So this is what I just mentioned to you before. So not only is it going to give them those process skills, the research also shows that there is evidence that group work can lead to higher achievement. Now, it doesn't mean it will lead, because group work could be a disaster, and it could lead to lower achievement. So I want to make sure that you understand that just because you put students in groups doesn't mean you're going to get that. It might be a complete mess if we don't strategically and carefully plan and monitor the groups that are happening. For those psychologists in the room, a little Vygotsky for you. We are all social learners, and that's why social learning is so powerful and groups are so effective, because we learn best when we're with each other. I say to students all the time, because students aren't necessarily always a fan of group work. You know that, right? They're like, ugh, because they've had a lot of bad group work experiences. And you may not be a giant fan of group work because you may have had bad experiences also as a faculty member. I've got to to tell you, there's been many times I've been ready to throw in the towel and just say, you know how easy it would be if I just gave a midterm and a final? My life would be so simple. I wouldn't have these folks coming to me with, so-and-so didn't do this. I had to do all that, all the conflict resolution stuff that you have to do to monitor this. But the truth is we do learn best when we're learning with other people. So if it wasn't the case, we would just give students a pile of stuff to learn on day one. They'd come back and show us that they learned it at the end of the semester. It's not just about having access to information, it's through experiences that we learn. So Vygotsky, really talks about the socio-cultural perspective and how important our relationships with others are to learning. All right, you should hopefully all have index cards on your table. I need everyone to have one index card in front of them. And then once you have the one index card, I will tell you what your instruction is. So pass them out. Okay, in a couple of minutes it's going to get pretty chaotic in here. So I want to make sure you're all kind of focused and zoomed in on what you need to do for this activity. Let me just do a quick nod to direct instruction. Some of you have been to my dynamic lecturing. I want to tell you that group work is not the only way to go. Lecturing is a very powerful way to teach students. We don't have time today to talk about how to lecture effectively, but I do want to give a quick nod to group work isn't the only thing you should be doing in your classes, especially here at the community college level, because direct instruction is extremely powerful, especially for novice or new learners, which happens to be our students pretty much. Definitely in their first class, but probably even in the second year classes, they're still relatively novice learners. Okay, so here's what we're going to do with this activity. In front of you, you have an index card. Right now, what you're going to do is you're going to write down one problem that exists with group work, that you have run into with group work. So I'll give you a minute to do that, and then I'll tell you the next set of instructions. So one problem, do not put your name on the card, but make sure you write legibly because other people will be reading your card. So you have to write enough so someone else understands. All right, is everyone pretty much finished writing down at least one problem? All right, so here's what's going to happen next. This is where the chaos begins. Do not move until I say move, okay? And it's very important that you listen to the instructions so everyone knows what's happening. You're going to take your index card, and you're going to stand up when I tell you, not yet, but when I say go, you're going to stand up. And you're going to exchange index cards until I yell, stop! When I say stop, you freeze. Remember like freeze tag when you were a kid? You freeze. And you find the person closest to you. Okay? Could have been the person you last exchanged cards with, but if they're halfway around, across the room already, whoever's near you. You only want to be in a group of 2. If you need to tuck someone else in, a group of 3, that's okay, but no more than that. 2 to 3 of you are going to get together. What's going to happen is you'll be standing up somewhere around the room, and you will be having 3 cards, 2 to 3 cards in front of you. You're going to look at the problems on there. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to discuss the problems and identify what you might do to fix that problem, so a possible solution. So what we're going to get started focused on today is solutions to the problems that you have. I'm certainly going to share with you my background and knowledge from reading the literature and all, but I want you to start thinking about, you already know some of the things that work. So what you'll do is you'll stop, you'll talk about it for about 2 minutes, then I'll say stop again, everyone freeze like it's freeze tag, and then I'll say go. You'll pass papers again, and you'll end up partnering up with somebody else with a different card. Okay? Questions on the process?
Yes.
Yes.
When we come up with an idea, a solution, do we write it on the card? Or do we don't write anything else?
You don't have to write the solution on the card because we don't have enough time for that. You could, if you're doing this in class, you could have them do it that way and then compare all the solutions together. Because I don't want to spend an enormous amount of time, we won't do it that way. Okay, any other questions? Yes.
Are we leaving tables?
Yes.
So we're going into.
Oh yeah, in fact,
room at large.
that's right, room at large. In fact, your first pass cannot be with somebody at your table. Okay? All right. On your mark. Get set, go. Get up and pass papers. Okay, stop. Stop. Find somebody near you. Does anybody, raise your hand if you need a partner. Everybody's got a partner? All right, go. Talk about the issues and possible
Preliminary.
You guys are good. That was really fast. All right, stop. Now you're going to pass papers again. And when I say stop, you'll end up hopefully with somebody new and new cards. Okay, ready? Go. Okay, so let me just do a quick timeout for process. What I had to engage in wasn't really group work, but it was a brief active learning opportunity. You could turn that into group work by then if I went to the next stage and I had to go back to your table now and then further talk about it. But what I want to do is I don't want to do that right now. I wanted to let you know that that's a great quick strategy. I mean, it took about 5 to 7 minutes, I guess, for the whole exercise. And you got students up, moving, actively engaged in terms of cognitive engagement, thinking about different strategies. There's lots of different ways you could use that in your classroom. A great way is, at the end of class, what's one thing you learned? You know, it's a good quick recap or summary, or at the beginning of class to kind of dust off the cobwebs. What did you learn from class last week? So there's a lot of great ways you can do that. Use that exercise in your class. I wanted to model that for you as well as talk about the group work issues. So I'm going to ask us not to report out on what you talked about in your, in your little partner, exercise, but instead I want you to just kind of think about that, reflect on that as we go through the rest of the content. So the secret that you've been all waiting for, right? That's why I kind of drew you in there. Come discover the secret. Well, the secret of effective group work is to be sure that your group work is a cooperative type of group work that requires interdependence. So what that means is you need each other, right? You need each other to really be able to be successful at that task. If you're really assigning an individual assignment to a group and they don't really need each other, the group isn't going to really function. So together they need to help move each other towards this purpose. And the other really key factor, which I think where most of us kind of flounder a bit, is with the individual accountability factor. So these are going to be two big components that we're going to talk about through the rest of the morning. And as you're thinking about group work in your classes, how can I increase the interdependence and how can I increase the individual accountability? So those are going to be two very important factors. I see lots of you writing. You certainly can write, but I also will give you a copy of the PowerPoint afterwards. I'll give it to you electronically. I'll give it to you, paper copy. The electronic one's a little bit tougher for me to get to as if you're an adjunct because of the Campus Cruiser email size. So if you email me from another email, like a Yahoo or Gmail or something, I can send it back to you because the Campus Cruiser emails are so stinking small that you can't really get a whole lot out of them. All right, so let's talk about this for a minute. So these are two key elements. The other important thing is you need to make sure that your group work aligns with your learning outcomes. So you don't just say, I want to do group work, and then make it fit into your curriculum. You need to always start with your learning outcome. What am I trying to accomplish? And how can I best accomplish that? Group work is not going to best accomplish every single one of your learning outcomes. There's going to be some learning outcomes that group work would be a disaster for. So you need to think about what's best aligned to your learning outcomes and will it fit or not. So you don't force fit it into a curriculum, you only use it when it does fit based on what you're trying to accomplish. But there are many times where group work certainly can fit 1, 2, 3, or even all of your learning outcomes depending on what they are. So that's really important. Now you've all heard of brainstorming, right? The power of groups. Two heads are better than one, you're going to come up with more ideas. You've heard of this before? Yes. Okay. So, it's a little bit true. It's not completely true. The research actually shows that when you put folks together in a brainstorming situation, like I just said, I want you to sit at your tables and I want you to brainstorm all the ways we can have productive group work. Well, what happens is a couple of problems do emerge. We have production blocking is one, and production blocking is basically, let's say, Johanna here comes up with this brilliant idea, and I'm sitting next to Johanna, and I'm thinking, well, my idea may not be as brilliant as Johanna's. I don't think I'm going to say it anymore. I'm going to just squash that, right? I may not give the group my idea because I've judged it to not be as valuable as somebody else's. So that's one of the problems. The other one is groupthink, and this happens a lot. So, somebody will say something in a group, you know, we'll have Phyllis over here who says something and everyone says, Phyllis, that's a fabulous idea. And everybody jumps on that bandwagon and you haven't even explored other options. You've just jumped on it. And the truth is we don't like conflict, right? We don't want to say, Phyllis, that idea sucks. You know, we don't want to say that. We don't want to even say it may not even be, you know, that great. You know, you don't want to do that. People aren't comfortable challenging, putting someone else down. So what happens is we just jump on that. And now, even if we don't really think it was the best idea ever, we're going to be like, well, 4 other people at the table said that, so I guess I should say it too, right? Jump on that bandwagon. So now you really don't have more ideas. You just have a lot of cheerleaders for one idea, right? And, you know, you might go to that group and it might seem like it's very consistent, but it's not. And then, of course, in a brainstorming session, you can have the good old social loafer, right? The person who sits there with their feet up, not doing anything, because Melissa here gave all the ideas, so I don't have to do a darn thing. Keep going, you know? And then Crystal jumps in with Tom and Terry, and, you know, and by the end, you know, you don't have to do anything, Joanna, because everybody else did all that work, right? So the idea here is that brainstorming is not an evil idea, but I think we overestimate how powerful it really can be. So instead, what we want to do is we want to have folks have the opportunity to work independently first. So what this particular study did is it looked at brainstorming, where they had groups work together, and they had to come up with a list, and if I recall correctly, it might have been ways to use a Google Clip or something. I have read so many different studies, but I think that's the one that this one is about. And then the next one was a nominal group. So what they did is they had them work independently first. So come up with as many ways as you can, and then talk about it as a group. And what they found was that this nominal group had a better quality as well as quantity. So there were more ideas and more high-level ideas if you give people think time. So what you don't want to do is just say, get into a group and start talking without any prep, you know, without any cognitive prep, without any clear instructions. That can lead to a disaster. So there's this concept called brain writing, which kind of pulls on the same idea of that nominal group. And what brain writing is when you have people sharing ideas. So we're actually going to do this, and I think the easiest way to show you what brain writing is for you to do it. So you're all going to need an index card. If you want to recycle the one you used, you can write on the other side. If you need another one, I do have some more. But everyone's going to get an index card again. Don't start working, I just want to go over the directions with you. So what brain writing is the first step. You're going to write down one solution that addresses a problem to group work. Now, you already have a bunch of them floating around because you just engaged in that exercise before. So any idea that you have that makes group work more productive, you're going to write it down on the card. Then what's going to happen is you're going to take your card, you're going to pass it to the right. So Margaret's going to give hers to Natalia. Now Natalia's going to get a card that has an item on it, and let's just say Margaret wrote down, give an individual assignment first or something. So, okay, so that might be on there. So now Natalia is not allowed to write that down because she already did. And she can't write down what she wrote down and gave over here. I'm sorry, your name again? Shannon. So she can't write down her own idea. So once you write down an idea, you can't just keep writing it on every card. That's a no-no. You have to come up with new ideas. And you just keep passing the cards around your table until I say stop, okay? So what happens is at the end, you should be getting a nice, pretty extensive list of ideas. It'll be easier in the beginning, and then it's going to get harder because you're going to have to come up with more ideas because you're going to run out of them. So you're going to have to get a little more creative with your thinking. Questions about the process or the task? All right. Yes.
So these solutions are not necessarily related to the problem on the
You can,
card.
any group work problem. It's a more global. Yeah, any problem at all relates to group work. So, all right, so go ahead, write down, and then as soon as you're done writing, you just pass it to your right. And you'll just keep passing and passing until I tell you to stop. All right, folks, whatever you have in front of you will be your last one, so finish writing your thoughts. You can hold on to your last one if you want to share it. We will in a moment, don't worry. All right, let's do another quick you can see here that this is a really small but easy way to build in some individual accountability where everyone has to participate, right? Everyone is involved and everyone is, sharing their thoughts. Now, what should happen, and you would in your class, you could maybe go on a little bit longer, and it depends on the nature of the prompt, obviously, what you're asking them to do. But as it went along, did it get a little harder? Yes, it does, and it does get much more tricky. But what would happen is if we didn't do it this way, and I just asked you to come up with ideas, you probably wouldn't come up with as many. How many of you had the experience when you read somebody else's idea, it triggered a different thought for you? So several of you had that. And that should happen, because what happened, I didn't think of that angle, and not that you're writing down the same exact idea, but now you can put a little bit of a new twist or a new idea together. So now the next step of brainwriting is that in your groups, you will then discuss some solutions. So I'm only going to give you about 3 minutes to talk about the brainwriting process. You can share a little bit about what you came up with on your cards, but what you would do in your class is just spend a little bit longer. So what we're doing is kind of mini versions of the group work that you would do because we don't have time to do the full-fledged version. So I'll give you 3 minutes to talk amongst your group about either the content on the cards and or the process of brainwriting. All right, so we're going to go ahead and stop these conversations. I know this is really terrible. I hate cutting off conversation, but one important thing for you to know about group work is you want to make sure you don't give them too much time that they're, off task. But this was a little too short. In class you give them a little more time, but because we're doing the mini sessions today. So you always want to think about how much time do I give? Well, if you give too much time, then what happens is they get off task. If you give them not enough time, then they're not going to get the task accomplished. Was there a question, Anna?
Yeah, just thinking about is if you would categorize this specific aspect of this specific category of brainwriting for solution-based questions, or if you would open it up so you're talking about sort of scientific aspects, and if it's it's not exactly a factual, doesn't feel like it's just a write down the facts, but it's a solution. So
well, it may not be just facts because you need to have more than one idea, but
right.
It could be examples of concepts. So maybe it's a content. So maybe it's a theoretical fact that you need to know in order to come up with different examples of it. So you want to try to think about how it might work in your discipline. It also could be used for the recap, most important point you thought of class. So that would be another way that would be transferable to anyone's area. So what did you learn best in this, class? Or what concept's most confusing? And now you have a conversation about the most confusing or the muddiest one. I think Stephen Brookfield, it was a long time ago that he was on campus, but he talked about that issue. So there's ways to transfer this idea really into any discipline, but it doesn't have to only be solutions. But it can't just be facts because you'll run out of things to say. So it has to be something that there's a multiple list. It could be name all the different bones in the body or something. It could be something like that if you want to go. I know the bio folks are struggling with some of those. So I guess you could do it that way, but it's really more designed for the more creative and applying kinds of exercises. So that is, so you just experienced one type of group work that again gets everyone involved and should have everyone's voice. So even if we had Debbie put something on her card and she didn't really want to talk about it, well, someone else might have seen her card and said, well, I really want to hear more about this. Who wrote this and can you say something more about it? I don't fully understand. So it's an opportunity for you to invite other people to communicate and share their ideas more fully. All right, how many of you have heard of the Jigsaw Classroom? Okay, so this is going to be new to a lot of you, and for others of you, it's going to be something that you're familiar with. But I want to tell you about what the Jigsaw Classroom is because it is one of the, hallmark examples of a group that has that interdependence, you need each other, and the individual accountability where everyone has to participate. And we are going to actually engage in a Jigsaw Classroom. It's a little bit of a big group in here. Your class will be a little smaller, and I'm actually going to have you only in 3 groups. So your groups are going to be a little larger, but I'm going to actually break your large groups up into smaller ones. So I'll show you how to manage that and how to do it. So let me first tell you kind of what this is. For the Jigsaw Classroom, what you start off with is a home-based group. So you're going to have a home-based group that you are accountable to. And each member of that home-based group is going to become an expert on a different topic. Okay? So you're actually only together for a couple of minutes in the beginning, then you're farmed out to your expert group. in your expert group, when you're doing this in your classroom, you would give them, maybe some readings ahead of time, some, materials, or if you're gonna have them work in class on it, you might give them access to the technology, tell them some certain websites that you want them to look at, whatever materials, you would give them materials to work off of. Today, for the sake of our exercise, I'm gonna give you the material of your brain and your experiences, because I'm in a room with folks I know you have good experiences to pull from, so I'm not giving you material for this, but in your classes, you would give them material for it. It could be a section of a textbook, it could be an outside reading, it could be a website, whatever it is. So you'll pick topics and how many of those. I probably recommend, about 3 to 4 or so, because you have to monitor during this expert group phase. This is where you work the hardest. Like, you're gonna work up a sweat, because you gotta go from group to group and make sure the experts really have the material you want them to bring back. Because if they don't, you've just wasted your class time, okay? So you have to work really hard, and you don't want to have too many groups to monitor during that expert group phase. So I'm going to do 3 groups, and I'm going to not have to monitor you as well as I would if you were my students. But if you were my students, I'd be going in there and I'd be asking you, what do you got? That's good. This not so strong. I think you need to go look at this source again. So I'm going to be over there checking and giving them feedback on what they're bringing back to their home-based group. Because after they're done being an expert, so this expert group, that amount of time varies depending on how big the task is. Today, you're not going to get a lot of time. You're going to get about 10, 15 minutes because that's all I got to give you. But in class, I often would spend 30 minutes. It could be 45 minutes, depending on how big the task is. So now you're in the expert group. After you all become experts, your job is going to be to teach your home-based group members the content that you learned. So I'm expecting all of the expert folks to have written down the key points, but they have to do that in about 2 minutes or less. So you're going to get no laughing, Barry. Now you can give them longer, but remember, however many of you have 3 groups, if you're reporting and you're teaching, that's 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, and you're asking for 30 minutes if you're doing it 10 minutes each. Today you're going to get 2 minutes. In class, again, you could give 5 or 10, but you need to account and allow for enough time for that to have, again, it depends on how much substance you're giving them. But what you want to do is you want to have them, what it teaches them is, first of all, when you are teaching, it's a very powerful way to learn. So your experts are going to be in a really good position at knowing that content. Second of all, it also focuses the experts on what's most important. Well, we have all this information here. What are the key concepts that I need to bring back? I don't need to give them all the details. I mean, you want to give them the key points. And that's where you, as the expert in the classroom, as the professor, need to go around and make sure that they have that information accurate. Because if it's inaccurate, they're feeding wrong information back to their initial group members. So during this last stage, this home-based group, everybody goes back to their original group. And today, you're going to get 2 minutes to go over the content and emphasize the key points. While you're doing that, the other members should be taking notes. And then if you want to really do it, you could even, if you want to really hold them accountable, you could give some kind of quiz or assignment or something related to it afterwards. You don't have to do that in your class, but it's another way if you wanted to add a 4th layer to the process. So what we're going to do is, these are the 3 groups that we're going to have. So I'm going to go and assign you to a home-based group. Once I assign you to your home-based group, after I'm done assigning everyone, so everyone can hear and make sure everybody knows who their home-based group is, then that home-based group is going to quickly, you have a minute to decide who's going to do which of those topics. Then I'm going to say, time to move. And when I say move, I'm going to have the self-selection versus assigned group folks over here. And you can just break yourselves up into a couple of tables. You don't all have to be one group. That's how you handle that. If the group is too large, because 10, 15 people, it could be too large. I think we have almost 40 people in here today. If you're in the second group, the equalizing workload, then you'll come over here to one of these 2 tables. And if you're in the grading, then you're going to come over here to one of these 2 tables. Okay? Questions about the process? All right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to assign you to groups. Now, here's the trick. When you first start doing this, if you haven't done it before, you're going to count 1, 2, 3, and that doesn't give you the way you want it to work. Because that gives you 3 very large groups. I have done that before, and lots of people do that the first time. So what you need to do is go 1, 2, 3 in your head. 1, 2, 3. You're a group, okay? Now we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, you're a group. I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, you're a group. All right, let me have your attention, please. At this point, you should have all determined who is who, okay? This is the easiest part of the process, folks. Now, I want to do a quick timeout for process. I ended up having a perfect match, so I ended up having the last group have 3. What happens if someone walked in right now? What would I do?
Tell them to leave.
You're messing up my program. No. If they came in now, what I would do is I would tuck them into another group and 2 people would share the expert role with one of them, okay? So if that happens, you don't need to break a sweat and panic. You just throw them into a group and then you'll have 2 people sharing and working together on one of the expert roles, okay?
What happens if somebody walks in 5 minutes?
Well, then they're going to be a second person for sure because I've already, you already have a primary. So there'll be a second person and I'll put them into an expert group and tell them they're a second person and I'll tuck
You're
them
going to
in.
explain everything over to them?
I would just do a quick explanation. I mean, and I do this more than once, so hopefully they kind of get what happens after that. They would just need the prompt and all. So the first time is the most confusing time, but after you start doing it, if you're doing this pretty regularly, they know the routine. They catch on pretty quickly. All right, so here's where the chaos is going to happen. You're going to get up. Actually, wait, before you get up, I'm going to not have you sit here. So I'm going to move group 2 to here and group 3 there. That way I don't have to move all my handouts. All right, so group 2 is going to be here. Group 3 is going to be there. Group 1 is going to be over there. All right, go to your expert groups. You're going to need a paper and pen. So I have to stop the conversation. Everybody come on back. Come on back. All right, they don't want to stop. I have to get them back. Dan, tell me, go get them back. Come back to me. I can't go on until I got your attention. So come on back to me. All right. In a second, I'll move you. In a second, you're going to go back to your home base group. When you're in your home base group, the first person can start. You're going to get 2 minutes, and then I will say stop. And then the second person will go, and I will say stop. I'm going to time you on my little clock and all. Make sure I have equal amounts so I don't rob anybody and not judge it right. So go ahead and get back to your group. So once I see you're settled, I'll start the clock. All right, the first person should be going now. All right, go ahead. Okay, group 2's turn. Switch, group 2. Group 2 go. Okay, stop. It's group 3's turn now. All right, stop. Stop. Now you get 2 minutes. Now you're going to get 2 more minutes to fill in the gaps if someone didn't get to finish and you have some questions. So 2 minutes for group processing of all the content. Go ahead, last time. Okay, need to bring it back. All right, let me just ask you, not about the content you were discussing, but about the process of participating in a Jigsaw classroom. Does anyone have any comments, questions, or observations? Yes.
I think it just so depends on the discipline. I could just already envision having the expert group students go back to their own groups and say, I really didn't get it. I really can't. I'm really not responsible as an expert. I can just envision that.
So that's where, your role during the expert group is. I mean, I'm sitting down with them. I mean, I didn't do all this with you because we didn't have as much time, but I'm sitting down with them. I'm asking them, not, how's it going? That's a terrible thing to ask when you go into the groups. Because I can almost guarantee they're going to say, fine, please get away from me. Just move on. Almost always they say fine. So when you're going to check in the group, you don't say, hey, how's it going over here? That's not productive. Instead, you want to do concept checks when you get into the group. What do you have for your first point? And you can call on different people to make sure that they have it. You can check to see that they're all writing it down, that they have the key concepts. So, and then if they're not getting it, if they're off task, that's where you could come in and have a teachable moment to teach the expert groups. And you might need to do some teaching in that expert group, to help them really grasp it if they're not able to grasp it on their own. and you have to make sure the task is graspable for them. So you don't want to give them a task that's way, way above their head. It has to be something that you might have already covered and they have some background knowledge on it. So you wouldn't necessarily do this with completely brand new information because they may not be able to become an expert in 10 minutes. Most of us can't, right? But if it's something that they have a little bit of background knowledge on and you're asking them to just dive a little bit deeper, it should work out better. So it depends on the prep and all. Yes,
I
Shannon.
just have a question about, so obviously in your expert group, the students are going to grasp that information. But what is the carryover for when they go back to college? Like, I feel like at least with my students, they wouldn't necessarily record as much information from the other groups.
So it depends on what you do later with that. I mean, if it's really not, you're not holding them accountable in any way, then the, point of taking notes and asking questions and all of that is diminished. But if there is some kind of assignment linked to it, some kind of accountability at the end, then it will, I think, transfer better. Now, of course, we're not asking them to teach each other. I mean, we are the experts. We're going to be the primary teachers. But we can ask them to go a little bit, dive into it a little bit more in detail, because learning with the intent to teach is a very powerful learning strategy. So what we want to do is try to increase the opportunities for students to teach one another, and to also, they're zooming in on key points. So maybe it's even some sections of a reading or something that you ask them to do, and now in class you're going to dive deeper, but now they have a little bit of background knowledge to help them move forward with this. So it doesn't mean that they have to master it in that 2 minutes or that 5 minutes, but it's exposure and focus, hopefully, that's happening there. So any other comments or questions? Yes, Chris.
I've actually used this before, a review for a test. And you have to have the class time to do it, but if you have the class time to do it, I actually give them specific question prompts, usually open-ended questions, and it might be a review sheet with 15 or 20 open-ended questions, and I'll tell them, I might take a couple of those questions from here and put it on the test. And so I'll give each of the initial groups, you've got questions 1 through 3. You have questions 4 through 6. You do 7 through 9, etc.
So now they're all together and they
Yes,
have the
and
whole
so
thing.
they're working as a group on just those 3 questions, and then they go back to their home-based group. I had the answers to questions 1 through 3, but everybody has the same sheet, and then they can also discuss it and ask questions, and hopefully, and I'd say to them, don't just take the answer at face value. If you question it or you don't agree with the answer, either bring it up during the group discussion or come and see me after class. But it kind of, it holds them accountable, but it also gives them an opportunity to, to review certain topics that I want them to review for a test.
Absolutely, that's a great way to use it. So, of course, there is no magic in any of this, right? I'm not guaranteeing that this is definitely going to work for you. I think it takes practice, especially in figuring out what the best task is for your discipline and how it's going to best work for you in your class. But the goal of this, think about what happened here. You were accountable back to your group. You couldn't loaf. I guess you could, but you might have 2 angry classrooms, right? So the likelihood of loafing really goes down significantly. The likelihood of learning has just increased because you have that teaching kind of element also. So I think that that's a really powerful piece of this. And the research has shown that not only does it increase academic performance, but also it increases liking of peers who are different from you. Because what else happened? You went out and talked to people who weren't sitting next to you. So you can start off with the convenience, grouping, for your home group, but now you're also interacting with people across the room. And chances of you doing that are pretty slim unless you force it in some way, right? People tend to talk to the people who are next to them, and that's it. So it's a great, strategy to really get students engaged with other people who might be not like them. Yes, ma'am?
I forget his name, but the guy that was here in the fall that did.
Todd Price, yeah.
Who introduced all these. We just want to hip hip hooray.
Woohoo! I like
Doing this, even if you're not doing group work like for the rest of the semester, like the first day doing some sort of jigsaw go around and knowing each other's names, really it can be super powerful for those students to then be able to have somebody to reach out to have a study partner or just to know somebody. I found it really, I'm in theater, so they have to talk to each other, but there were differently abled sort of people in one of my class, and it helped that person be totally integrated with everybody because they had to meet everybody and they instantly sort of had friends, even if it was surface level. So just to do the simple activity, even if it's just about the syllabus or something like that, the first day of class, to really say,
Right,
let's
you
get
could
it
do
going.
a jigsaw on the syllabus where
Right.
you're having,
Which is
you know,
sort of
you
what I
have this assignment, you have, you know, this issue related, you know, you have policies and procedures, you have, you know, different topics, so you could do it. The one thing I will caution you about is that you need to make sure that the groups have even kinds of tasks so that they take about the same amount of time. So you can't have an expert group that's like not even close to being done and somebody else has been done for 5 minutes. So it's important to try to make sure that they're equal in terms of how long those tasks will take. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and talk to you a little bit about what some of the literature says about some of these topics, and it may validate what you folks are talking about. It may contradict what some of you folks are talking about. I am not telling you that you have to do it one way or the other way. I'm going to tell you the way that I do it and my rationale for that. So that's what we'll be doing now. We're going to start off with the self-selection versus assigned selection. It is easier to have them self-select because they like that. You know, so they enjoy it. People like to be with other students who are like them. But when I came across some of the readings here, and this one in particular by Shimizawa and Aldrich, where it talked about how some groups of minority status and lower ability levels, you know, you talked about the differing cognitive ability levels, are at a disadvantage, that made me second guess my self-selection. You know, I was using kind of a combination before, but I relied a little bit more on self-selection than assignment in the beginning. And it made me a little bit concerned about that because you do have folks that might be put at a disadvantage. You know, all your high-achieving folks are going to kind of hover together, and then who's left for the low-achieving folks? They may not have high-functioning peers that are going to really help them be more successful. So it can be problematic to do the self-assigning, and also, you know, folks are going to engage with others only if you force them sometimes, right? So, you know, we like to be next to people who are similar to us in a variety of ways. And by assigning groups, you can kind of force some of that communication, which increases critical thinking skills and creativity, because we know that exposure to folks with different perspectives and different backgrounds and different points of views is going to maximize our critical thinking. So cognitive diversity is also important, not just in terms of ability, but in terms of different kinds of approaches and perspectives to the world. So I am using a lot more of assigned groups, and when they get cranky with me, because they do, I give them the research behind it, and I tell them my rationale for it. And oftentimes, if you tell students the rationale behind why you're doing something, they're usually less cranky, because they don't think it's just to irritate them, you know? You actually have a reason, and you have a, you know, data, and we can look at the research if you want together behind it, and they're much more, you know, just kind of accepting of the process if you just tell them why. You know, so I do give them the why behind why I do it. Some research suggests changing groups throughout a semester. It's kind of like, you know, how you take your family for granted and you start not treating them as probably nice as shit all the time. So same thing can happen if you stay together too long with a group. So what this particular, you know, this study we talked about was really kind of shifting groups had a more positive outcome. So you don't want to shift them every single day. You want to be able to have that group dynamic kind of emerge where they really do build those relationships. But like I have 2 big group projects and I give 2 different groups. And they get cranky with me again because they're like, I'm comfortable, you know, I got these people, we kind of got a pattern going down. I'm like, yeah, but life's not just about being comfortable, you're here to learn. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna do all the things that help you learn best. So I really kind of, again, give them that strategy behind it, and it seems to work. Now, I'm not telling you I never use self-selection groups. I mean, especially for in-class activities, it's very easy to just say, okay, talk to your neighbors, you know, about this. So I do mix and mingle it, but with the bigger kinds of assignments, especially the outside of class assignments, I often do assign them. But I also am giving them a lot of class time to do group work. And I think that's one of the mistakes that we make is we just send them completely out there on their own. And we know our students' schedules. It's a nightmare. And then we expect them to know how to function in a group. We're going to talk about that in a minute, about how do you be a group member. And we just expect it to all work well. So now that I started having the foundation of the group work happen in class, not the whole thing, but some of it, while I'm there to support, go around, see who's doing what. I don't have to have people telling me all those stories. I can see who's coming to the table with work. I can just witness it. It also increases their accountability because they know I can see it. So that really has been very helpful. So what I would say to you is if you really want to build these skills, you know, Nick talked about the power of these skills and for the employer, you know, we talked about achievement. If these skills really are truly important to you, then you may want to integrate them into your class, even if they're external assignments, to have that foundation of the group work set up in your classroom. All right, so so now we're going to talk about equalizing workload. So there's lots of different strategies. The first thing that I want to talk to you about is the importance of training students to be in a group. We make the assumption that they know how to do this, and you folks know how to do this because you're professionals, you've been in groups, so I didn't need to give you a training before we started out today, but our students here, and really in most other colleges too, they need a little bit of training. They need to know that there's roles in groups, so here's my 5R approach. I think that what we want to start off with is establishing rapport. So the first thing is you got to get to know your group members, so you need to give them a little time for that social part of the group. Who you are, what's a little bit about yourself. That's an important element because if you know people in your group, it's just going to make it function more effectively. Then the second R is the rules. We need to set up rules, and this is where most of the groups go bad, And not just a rule where you need to do what you're supposed to do, but what happens if you can't? Because life happens sometimes. What's the process going to be in this rule? So if everyone's supposed to bring, this article to the group, and I don't bring it, what does that mean? So are there any consequences? You want to kind of build that in to the system so people know very clearly what the group expectations are. So what are all the rules in this group? If you can't make it to a meeting, what's the protocol? Do you have to email ahead of time? Do you have to make sure you've uploaded your material into Campus Cruiser? What do you have to do? And then what are the roles? So what roles are you all going to play? And this is something that you could do. You could assign different roles to groups, and I'm just going to skip over here one second. Here are some roles that might work depending on what you're doing. I use this for a presentation, that they're working on together. But you can come up with the different roles, and you could either assign them roles. They could rotate so they get different opportunities to practice being in different types of leadership roles. The one role that I would say that I think is a really powerful one is the questioner role. Because remember what I told you before about groupthink? We don't like to challenge other people, but if it's your job to challenge them, that feels a little more comfortable. My goal is I'm supposed to ask you, is there another explanation for that? Could there be another way of looking at it? How do we know that's true? So my role is to ask those questions of the group. And then all of a sudden they're starting to look at those kinds of questions. So what you would need to do is figure out what the roles are. Now you could do that for your group. The groups could come up themselves with it, but I think it's kind of powerful for you to figure out what roles work best for your class, and then they could tweak and modify them. But then it's clear who's doing what, because that's one of the problems. So if we go back to the 5R again, so once they have the rapport, the rules, the roles, the next thing is they got to get ready to work. Group work is work. They need to know it takes time. Learning doesn't happen like this. Learning takes time, so we need to make sure that they're ready to work. They have prepared and done everything they need to do. And of course, we have to have them evaluate, so they have to remember to check in. How are we doing as a group? This is our deadline over here. We kind of said that we were going to have this much done by this date. We need to check in. Is this all working? Is everybody doing what they're supposed to be doing? Are we progressing at the pace that we need to progress at? And you could ask for progress reports from your group. You can force some of this remembering to evaluate by assigning it. You ask them to do some kind of assignment. How is the group coming along? What do you need to do to make it function more effectively? What are you going to need to do to make sure that this project is done on time? And you can do content checks, process checks, whatever it is that you want to do. But the research is clear that if you train students, they will do better in the group. So you will have less nightmares by spending a little bit of front-end time talking about the roles and the rules and all that other stuff. Okay. The other issue for increasing the accountability, and this is really, really important, this is a big one, is have them do something individually before it's time for them to engage in a group. So I teach psychology classes, and a lot of my classes, I have a paper and a presentation, amongst other things like quizzes, exams, and other kinds of assignments. But the two kind of meaty things are this paper and presentation. And for the longest time, I had them on different topics. They were just kind of separate entities. And then I said, well, why am I doing that? If I make them do the paper before the presentation on the presentation topic, now they have to go to the group with something. So now you can link your assignments to help prepare them for the activities. So in the beginning of class, I give out the options of assignments. Now the only part that's a little restrictive is I do have to restrict them to the 5 topics or whatever that I have if I have 5 groups. So you can't do any topic for your paper. So you have to end up picking one that enough of the class members are interested in. And then I'll have them do the paper, and they're not even a part of a group yet. They don't know who their group members are yet. They just know what their paper topic is. Now, the first time they're getting together, they've got an entire research paper on this topic. Think about how different that first conversation is going to be versus like, hey, our topic is, what are we going to do? Anybody know anything about this? How are we going to start? So by giving them individual work ahead of time, it doesn't always have to be a big giant paper, but whatever it is, giving them individual work ahead of time, again, you're holding them accountable because you are grading them on that, probably, I do. And you're also increasing the interdependence. They need each other to achieve this, so they might need more than what their paper did. So now they need each other to fill in those other gaps and to identify other resources. So, maybe Margaret had a resource that I didn't have, and I got to go pull that one from her. And so we got to pull it all together for this group project. So you can't throw folks into group without background knowledge and without information. So you don't just start, again, you can for a syllabus exercise, you can for lower level content, but if you're talking about a bigger project, you need to make sure you've taught it first, and they have the background that they need in order to get the information that they need. So building that prior knowledge and giving them individual assignments really does increase that accountability. Now, I'm going to skip this because we're running a little bit low on time and I want to get to some of the other things. I was going to do this other activity. I have an article for you here that I'm going to share with you. I'm going to let you walk away with it. I was going to do an activity with it, but I just don't think we have enough time for it. So I want to tell you about the activity because you could use the group activity in your class. So basically, you identify any kind of reading. I identified a reading on group work for you. Very handy dandy, right? Right on point. So you give them some kind of material to work from. And what this save the last word for me exercise would be, so this is how it would work. You would all look at this and I'd ask you to identify a quote or something from the article that kind of, just spoke to you, that was meaningful to you in some way. And then I'd, tell you on an index card to write down that quote. And on the back of it, write down why. What did it mean to you? What did it make you think about? Why did this kind of strike a chord for you? And then what happens is everybody has their quote, and you would start, and Johanna here would hold her quote up to everybody, and everyone else would have to respond to the quote, and Joanna's not allowed to talk. So she holds her quote up, and everyone else has to respond and say, well, what does that mean to them? What do they think about when they see that quote? All of that. So they're kind of responding to what Joanna thought was important. After they're all done responding, then Joanna gets to talk about why she picked that quote. And then you rotate along. Now think about what this does. It gets them engaged in some kind of material related to your class. And it also engages them in listening skills because they have to listen to everyone else before they get to talk. And everyone gets to participate. So everyone has a voice. So you kind of go around the table. Questions about the process. I was hoping we were going to get to experience it, but I think we just don't have time. Yes, John?
So you give everyone the same order?
Everyone has the same material that they're working off of, but they're, most likely they're going to pull a different quote. It's very rare that they would pull the same one. You're not going to give them only a paragraph.
I know, I meant the whole class has the same order.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Do you assign the article ahead of time, or do you get it out in class?
You can do it either way. You can ask them to pick something out from their reading that they want to bring. It could be even something from the textbook chapter, what they thought was a really important point, or, something that they, just kind of thought was really critical or meaningful to them, or you thought of an application for it. Or it can be a small assignment that you're giving them in class that you would then have them dive into afterwards. So now that piques their interest a little bit in reading it too. So it can be kind of as a review of something that they did, or as a jumping off point for reading. Yes?
The same quote could be picked by more than one student?
Well, it could, but it's not that likely that it'll happen if you have, enough of material. Yeah.
My point is, would you like to bring those people on the same table, meantime the other students are responding on that, and let the students who pick the same quote share their ideas?
Yeah, I haven't done that. I really haven't done it that way, but you could, I guess. There's lots of different ways spin-offs off of this. Again, the primary idea here is to get folks engaged in the content and with each other, and to really be cognitively engaged with the content. So it's another way that you can really do it no matter what your discipline is. As long as you got content to work off of, you can can really get them engaged a little bit in that process. So just another way to do group work. Okay, so Barbara Millis, she's the author of this paper actually that you're going to get from me. I was really just I was at one of the Lilly Teaching and Learning conferences, and I just happened to sit next to her at breakfast, and I had read some of her stuff because she's pretty big in the world of cooperative learning, but I had no idea I was sitting next to Barbara Millis. You know, I'm just like talking to everybody. That's what I do at these conferences. Hey, what do you do? Tell me about your, so I'm talking, and all of a sudden I found I'm sitting next to Barbara Millis. I'm like, this is fun. So I was saying, well, let me ask you some group work questions since you're sitting next to me at breakfast, as you're trying to eat your muffin. So I said to her, you know, I struggle a little bit, and she's like, here's what I do. She says, my students don't know what they're presenting until the day they're presenting. And I said, what? She said, here's how it works. That increases accountability. How do I do that? On the day of the presentation, I will randomly assign you your part. I started to have I'll start to get a little anxious, and she says, it's the only way to really increase to make sure that they all know all the stuff. And I said, you know, this is a really valid point, because you know what happens with group work? It's divide and conquer. I'll do this, you do that, and everyone knows this much at the end of the project. And that's not our goal, right? Our goal was for them to learn the whole thing, but have this process skill thing too. They're going to learn how to cooperate and interact with others at the same time as learning all this stuff. So I went back to my classes. I said, I'm going to try this, and I'm going to tell them the rationale, and we'll see how it goes. Well, they freaked out on me. Not surprisingly, they freaked out on me. So they were all like anxious. So I said, well, we're going to do it anyway because I want you to learn the whole thing. I know you're a little anxious. You know, we'll get through it. And I said, here's the thing about anxiety. It's temporary. Here's the thing about learning. It lasts. I said, so since our goal is about learning, and I want you to learn all of this, we're going to try it this way, and we're going to see how it goes. And they were anxious on the first day. So basically, I would take their PowerPoint, and I would make them divide it equally into, you know, there's 5 of them. You tell me where the breaking point should be, where you think it's equally distributed, and then on the day, right before you get up, I'll be like, okay, you do this, you do that, you do this. And I'm going to tell you that they didn't love it. They still didn't love it even with my rationale. Now, I've changed it just slightly in terms of the way I package it, and it has gotten better results. They still don't love it, but they don't hate it anymore. I tell them, okay, forget about it. Pretend you're doing an individual presentation, but I'm giving you a support team. And on the day of your presentation, your support team is going to relieve you of some of your duties. So you see how cognitively I just put a little bit of a different spin on it? They're less angry about it. You know, they're like, well, why aren't you telling me? I said, I am telling you. You're responsible for the whole thing. If your classmates don't show up, you have to do the whole presentation. You have to know it all. So, but on the day of the presentation, I'm going to relieve you of some of your duties, and someone else will step in and help you out. And that has really made a world of difference, because I have gone away, you know, my students have gone away from that knowing this much and freaking out if someone didn't show up because, oh my God, what are we going to do? Like, what do you mean, what are you going to do? You're going to do that part. I'm like, that's what you're going to do. You know, like, somebody's got to do it, and you're part of the group, so you should know it. So this increased accountability is a really powerful way to go. And this is Barbara Millis's idea. Now, you can also do this with accountability cards. She uses playing cards, but you could use index cards. So let's just say you have all these index cards. You had to put your name on each index card. Then I would come over here to this table and take all of their index cards, and I would go like this, right in front of them. And then I would go like this. Emmy, it's your turn. You're going to report out on what the group said. So now what that does is it keeps the group, everybody accountable. So when you're having a generic conversation here, I want you to talk about blah, right? When it's time to report out to the class, I'm going to pick. You know, it's not going to be Terry who always raises his hand and said, I'll do it. No. We're going to do this randomly to get everyone involved. Tracy?
What happens when you pull out my card and I say, I don't know?
Well, that doesn't happen that often to me. I did have one student that it happened to, and I was like, really? I said, you've been together for 10 minutes. I'll give you a minute to talk to your neighbor and figure it out again. I'll come back to you. So I don't let them off the hook. And then if they push, I only had this one happen one time. And then, you know, maybe they're just having a personal thing or something. They can't focus. They can't concentrate, then I'll just move on to somebody else. I'll just say, all right, next time you owe him one. You know, he's coming in there to save you today. Next time you gotta pull through for him. And then I'll probably talk to the student outside of class because what the heck were you doing? You know, so if you had a real reason and you couldn't focus because of something personal, that's totally fine. But if you're just putting your feet up and on your phone or something, that's not fine. But again, you're monitoring the groups to try to make that not happen that often. Okay, so any questions or comments about Barbara Millis's idea about increasing accountability? If you tell them that they're going to be held accountable, telling them ahead of time, they end up performing better. So it's a good idea to tell them they're going to be held accountable, not just surprise them at the end. I mean, you don't just go and say, okay, now I'm going to get you and see if you're paying attention. No, tell them ahead of time. You want them to pay attention. So it shouldn't be a secret. Tell them. That's really kind of powerful. All right, now we're going to talk about grading, because grading is probably the worst part of group work. At least for me it is. I hate the grading part of group work. I really hate the grading part of teaching. Grading is just not my favorite thing. But I know it's valuable and important, and students need the content, from you so that they know whether or not they're on track. So here's some of the research. If you put students and you give a group grade, this is what happens. You get a nice vanilla, generic C or B or whatever, and the high-functioning students are pulled down by the low-functioning, and the low-functioning, they're quite happy. They're pulled up by the high-functioning, and you get this nice middle-of-the-road, pretty meaningless grade, right? So research is pretty clear on that. We've all had that experience. We may have all been in a group like that at some point in our lives. Here's what students say. I'll give you a second to read that. Not shocking, right? So students who don't get group work or don't want to do group work, they're like, yeah, group grades. Students who get group work and are, maybe real serious about school, yuck, group grades. Please, it's a disaster. I mean, some of them really freak out about it, especially if they're trying to get into a competitive program and they're really concerned about their grades. They don't want this to happen. So these students hate group grades. These students love group grades, right? So I also worried about introverts a little bit, with the grading and group work. Is it damaging to folks that aren't extroverted? I'm an extroverted person by nature, as you probably already figured out, but not everybody else is. What they showed with this particular study was that the extroverts and introverts really didn't have a significant difference in terms of group work and independent work, although the introverts seem to do a little bit better on the exam. So maybe we're not being fair to extroverts on the exams. I don't know. But anyway, I don't think there's a big cause for alarm, really, to worry about some people. Although they may not be comfortable in that role, they can be effective in that role. So there's no data that supports introverts kind of having a negative impact. So now you have the question, should you let them grade themselves? Should peers be grading them? And basically, by and large, you're going to get inflated grades if you go that route. So the research is kind of clear about that you're going to get some inflated grades. So it's not easy to really figure out how you should grade them, but I have moved away from group grades, and I've almost only given individual grades for group projects. And I can do that because they're randomly assigned a part of a presentation, so I give them a grade based on their part. Some of it has to be shared because their final PowerPoint has to be shared. There's some elements of it, the resources that they all pulled together. So there's elements that are kind of shared, but I'm grading them independently. And I'm also, I'm just going to skip this for a second, I'm also linking the assignments like I told you before. So they got an individual grade on the paper. I asked them all to create a PowerPoint so that I don't just have a PowerPoint whiz creating the PowerPoint. So everyone's getting an individual grade on a PowerPoint, and then they get together as a group and they mix and mingle them to make the best PowerPoint they can. So they're mingling all the best and making the best product that they possibly can. But they just got an individual grade on their PowerPoint also. So I'm giving grades along the way. So the final product grade doesn't have to be like a gigantic one, and it is mostly individual. And the reason for that is just because I don't want this to happen. And I did just about all of the options out there. I had everybody grading each other. I had averaging. I was spending hours and hours calculating these peer grade things that I don't even know that they were good at grading. I mean, let's face it, folks, grading is hard. Now we're putting peers in a position to grade each other. That's not fair. I really don't think it's fair because you're asking them to engage in a skill that is not their job to grade their peers. It is not what they didn't sign up to be a teacher. You know, you signed up to be a teacher, so you have to grade, right? So this is what you do, but they didn't. So I don't really think it's very fair of us to ask peers to grade one another. Now, feedback is a different story. I'm not against or opposed to feedback, and I have used a variety of ways to do that. Sometimes I'll use some kind of accountability log, keeping track of who's doing what. And actually, most recently, I'm going to tell you what I do is I just make them do their group work on the message board. I said, I want to see the message board with all the group work, because then I can see who's adding content, which is the substance of it, right? Who's adding ideas. So in order for you to get a final product, you're going to have to share resources anyway. You're going to have to create something. I want you to do it via the message board because then I can see who's doing what. And just the matter of they know that I can see it, increases their accountability and makes it less likely to have an uneven, kind of thing happening in the group. And I tell them I'm going to go through that as I'm grading you. So your grade isn't just how well you did in your 3 minutes of fame up here, but also how much you contributed to the group process. So I'm looking at your contributions. Were they significant or were they not? So that's kind of what I've been doing. And again, I'm not telling you it is magical or phenomenal, but it's kind of been a process that I've been going through, and I've moved away from the group grades. The other reason that I moved away from the group grades is that some evidence shows that group grades actually decreases interpersonal relationships because you can increase conflict and hostility in the group if it puts under pressure. So that's kind of one of the reasons. And these authors here, King and Benke, had said that, remember, not everything has to be graded. A lot of the group work you do, you don't have to grade everything. So you're doing it, as a learning experience, but not everything that they learn or do has to be graded. And they cautioned against firing members. And here's why they said that. They said, you are saying that it kind of, some of the folks say, well, models the real world. Well, not really. Do any of us get to fire any of our colleagues? Not really, right? You, as the instructor, may opt to get someone out of a group if they're bringing them down and give them an alternate assignment. And, certainly they can come to you and let you know if there's issues. But peers firing each other and grading each other, it seems that there's some literature that speaks to the negative, interpersonal relationships that can happen as a result of that. And our whole goal was to have more positive relationships. So I feel like it's a little counterproductive. So if you are going to do that, I just caution you to be very careful in the way in which you do that, and be mindful of the fact that it could have potentially a negative impact. Comments, questions, reactions to grading?